Hello and welcome to Classically Imperfect, an organization dedicated to providing mental health and wellness resources to young classical musicians. I'm Mary Lizalde, one of the co-founders and the executive director, and today I am joined by Dr. Annie Bosler, a professional horn player, music educator, and owner of College Prep for Musicians. Today we'll be discussing the live college audition process and what high schoolers should be doing during the weeks prior to their college auditions. Hi, Dr. Annie, how are you?
Thank you for having me. That's great to see you.
Yeah, great to see you too. I know we already did an interview before, but can you refresh us on your background in music a little bit?
Sure. So I'm a professional horn player. Like you mentioned, I've been fortunate enough to play with everyone from the LA Phil to San Diego Symphony. Done a lot of recording work in LA, and but also I'm a very avid teacher. So I have a private teaching studio of middle school students, high school students, and then I run a company called College Prep for Musicians, which is a real passion of mine. When I was growing up, my mom was a farmer and my dad's a general contractor, and so they did not know what to do with this, musician daughter. And so when I was going through the process, I was really late to the game. I tell everyone that they're always ahead of where I was, and so we didn't actually start going through and looking at colleges until December, or actually, sorry, Thanksgiving of my senior year, which is, if you know anything about schools admissions deadlines, they're due usually around November 30th or December 1st. And so it was really late in the process. And so that's what became my passion with the college prep side. And so that's what started this whole company. And so my life is kind of varied. I do a little bit of teaching, a little bit of playing, and then also run this company now.
What's one thing musicians can do during this winter break to help them during their college auditions besides practice?
So if you are a senior right now, and let's say you are going off to major, let's start with performance, so music performance. I think the number one thing to think about outside of practice is essentially, you've got this long stretch of auditions coming up. So the live audition window is usually from about January 10th to about March 15th. And so that window can be, it can be filled with a lot of auditions, a lot of travel. And so the first and number one thing is to be organized. And so, um, I would what I usually recommend to everyone I work with is to go print pieces of paper. Not Don't do this digitally because I think it's nice to look at it. So either buy a paper calendar or print pieces of paper, print January, print March, print April. I usually use my iCal on my Mac and just print those from there and put them on the wall. And then that way you can really map out all the different audition options. So, there usually every school has a multiple options. And so you want to put all of those on the calendar so you know those. And then whatever one you're assigned, maybe put that in red. And the reason to do that is because you might find that some of these schools overlap. And in that process, then you could ask other schools, maybe if you could move your date to accommodate. And so you can obviously be at all the auditions if possible. But I think the organization of it is really important. The second piece within that is to make sure that your live audition rep is really organized. And by that, I mean, make sure you know what every school's asking. And it might sound like a silly thing, but I cannot tell you the number of times I've worked with somebody who has not maybe worked with me through the whole process and will join about now and
Mhm.
or later even. And they'll say to me, "Oh, I missed this one piece of music that I had to learn, this one excerpt or this one solo. I didn't realize I needed this contemporary solo for this one school." And it really just to create a little bit more anxiety than you needed to over a certain school's audition because they didn't have it prepared as far in advance as the other pieces. So the organization is really important, more than I can, express in just a couple of sentences. But yeah, does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. I think really seeing what you need to do and have it organized is probably the most important part to your college audition process since it can avoid a lot of stress. And as for the practicing aspect of it, I know a lot of musicians right now are practicing 4, 5, 6 hours a day. Do you have any advice or tips to help with burnout when actually practicing during this time?
Yeah, so I think one of the first steps I usually tell all students is think of the list for the live auditions as one big master list, meaning that you lump all the schools together and you're not worried about, this is this school and this is that school and this is this school. So just think about them as one big list. And then Just make sure so this is a pro tip. So when professionals, go take an audition, one of the steps they do is they divide it. And this is also, I wrote the college prep book with two other authors, which is one is Dr. Kathy Tezard, the head of admissions at Juilliard, and the second author is Dr. Don Green, who is a very famous peak performance psychologist in our industry. And even one of Dr. Green's tips in the book is to divide your list into what we call like the A, B, and C. C being what still needs wood shedding, slow metronome work. B, which needs more polishing, which is, things you might loop or like run, 5 times in a row. And how close are you getting to what you want? And then things in the A column are things that are more performance ready, things you could go ahead and run a mock audition on. And I think if you can really divide your practice out, it gives really goal oriented, you know, direction in your sessions. And that also will help with burnout because you know what you need to work on. Um, Mental practice is another really key important thing. Some people call it visualization, some people call it mental rehearsal, some people call it mental performance. But what it is that you're thinking through, say, an excerpt, part of your solo. It could be 16 bars. It could be the whole thing. Maybe a scale you have trouble with. And so you picture yourself from start to finish, perform that thing, that piece of music, and try to put yourself in a room. Maybe you look up what is, one school's auditorium look like, or recital space, and that might be where you're playing. So you look it up, you put yourself in that space, you run the piece or the technique or the etude or whatnot solo excerpt straight through, and you see it go in a positive fashion, and you see yourself walk out there, play it. Maybe you see yourself from inside your body, like through your eyes, or maybe you see yourself like you're in the audience watching yourself do it. It doesn't matter what direction you see it, but you watch yourself visualize it or perform it, and it goes well from start to finish. And then at the end of it, you see yourself walk off stage and you're really pumped about how it went. And you'd be surprised when I do classes on these things that I'll ask a student to run something like that and they get done with running that. And I say, well, how did it go? And they're like, oh, terrible. And I
Mm.
always crack up at that because you created that in your brain. You know what I mean? It's such a funny thing to think about when you created that experience for yourself so you can control that. It's your own home movie. So if that happens, or maybe you keep seeing yourself not do well at an upcoming audition, like you kind of see that over and over and over in your head, take a pause, rewrite that in your brain, rewrite that piece of future, and then see it go like you want it to go. So when you're practicing, and I know, instead of this 3 to 4 hour grind, like be real smart about it. Think about what needs the most work, what things can you actually maybe work on by just listening more? What things can you work on by doing some visualization? Maybe do a mock audition in your brain. Also, like watch yourself run from one piece to the next. And that can really, really put you in a different mindset and a different space. And especially if you're feeling not prepared for some reason, or you think you're not prepared, just the visualization is really important. It's something to steal from the professional side of the industry that a lot of pros use that a lot of times, and the athletes do too.
Is there like a way that you divided your practice to make sure you really focus on what you needed to? Like I know, for example, um, a lot of the time these musicians probably don't have a lot of time to warm up or they don't think they have a lot of time to warm up. Is there like anything that you like how did you split up your practice time during this audition
Yeah,
process?
and just to be clear too, I did one for undergrad, and then I decided to go get a master's. So I did it for master's, and I decided to go get a doctorate too. So I've done this process 3 times just myself, and then obviously led a lot of people through the same process, hundreds at this point. And so the key to that, I think, and I'll give you another pro side tip. I think is that most pros kind of have 2 sets of warm ups. They
Mhm.
have a shorter version and they have a longer version. I mean, it's just technique, right? Call it warm up, fundamentals, routine, whatever you want, but it's something to get you into the parts of your playing that need improvement, right? Or are home base to kind of give you, this is my home base for the day, and kind of grounds you and brings you back. And so I think really asking yourself, like, what are the things that are tangible that I could really, that I often think about the spots in my music that need work. Like, what are those kind of spots? What are they covering? Are they like tone? Is it intonation across an arpeggio? Is it articulation? Is it, large interval slurs? Or, I don't know all the string equivalents, but
Mhm.
I try to then create an exercise to capture that in my routine. So it's kind of like I'm double covering the music. I'm covering what I need to actually work on because probably it's a weakness anyway. and then, whatever that is in that, excerpt or solo that also needs work. And I try to double cover it. So it's in my routine and it's then in the piece. And so if you can think about it that way, like what are the things I need to cover? And then kind of put that in your routine and have a short version so you still could do a 10-15 minute version and feel solid. And then you have a longer version. At most, pros are probably warming up between 25 to 45 minutes depending on the person. So usually there's like a 10-minute version, I mean, again, proportionally to whatever they need, and then a longer version. And so, I think anybody going into this area of college is starting to get to that space as well in terms of time for their routine. And that I would just say that's something positive to do. And always look at extremes. Are you covering high, low, loud, soft, fast, slow, lyrical, technical,
Mhm.
tone in general, intonation, and just as long as you're covering those things in some form or fashion throughout your day, usually you're going to see a lot of progress. And often, refresh that technique, I would say,
Mhm.
every few months. Like I know I do have colleagues that have been doing their technique for like 20, 30, 40 years. Their fundamentals or routine, again, whatever you want to call that
Mhm.
thing they do every day. But I personally see it as something I need to adjust about at least every 3 months or so.
Mhm.
Because I or at least pull out some things and put in new things. So if you haven't done that as a high school student or someone looking into college auditions right now, think about, maybe it is time to adjust that or change it up or refresh it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. So most high school students right now have their college auditions or might have their college auditions on the same day or like within the same week. And that can either be, traveling within the same day or the same week. Do you have any advice for helping students mentally prepare for auditions that might be, for example, like back to back? Because I know one of my friends last year had an audition throughout the same day and they had to take the train from and like they almost missed their audition. Like how do you mentally prepare for multiple auditions within like the same time span?
It's a great question. You've got so many great questions. The thing I would recommend is like I was saying with that map, so that calendar. So put it on the wall, really plan out everything. Really think about, how long does it take to get from one place to another, obviously. And if you find that you're too crammed between schools, talk to both schools. The admissions offices, they want, I think this is a big statement I'm about to say because I don't always feel high school students think about this. They
Mhm.
want you to play well. They do. They're not trying to make you play poorly. They're not, the schools want you to play well, the teachers want you to play well. They know you put in a lot of time, a lot of finances, a lot of resources to get to that place, to get to that audition. I mean, most of the times you already passed a pre-screening, so um just they want you to play well. So talk to the admissions office, talk to the professors, and see if you could maybe get a little more grace period between those. If especially if it's that tight, like your friend had, then try to get more grace period between those two. But if they are back to back, I mean, that does happen a lot. I mean, I've had students take 3 and 4 sometimes back to back, like one day after the other, and sometimes two on one day.
Mhm.
Um, the biggest thing is to know this: most everybody in this position is trying to peak in their performance more in about a 12-week window than they ever have in their entire life. And
Mhm.
that's it's true. And so what the things that I recommend are one, just really making sure, if anything, you kind of clear your schedule as much as possible. That means anything at school that you can postpone and turn in later or turn in earlier, ask the teachers to help you out. Two, any family obligations, any social obligations, try to move those around too, so that your weeks can be really dedicated to your practice and to your mental health, and to sleep and rest. Because the thing I think not everybody realizes, when you do this much performing, especially at a peak performance level, it takes a lot of energy, a lot. And that's something I've really learned from Dr. Green and what he wrote in our book. It takes a lot of energy. So that means you need a lot of sleep. And so if you're trying to do, 7, 8, 9, sometimes more auditions in that 12-week window, you're going to feel that burn. So just make sure that the sleep is really important. And so whatever you need, everybody's different. Some people can survive off of 6.5 a night. Some people need 9 a night, and you need to know what you need. And if you don't, experiment with that. Some people also, naps are really important, not usually too long because it gets you too groggy, but maybe 20-minute power nap kind of things.
Mhm.
Um, and so I think that's important. I think your water, whether you're a brass player, a singer, whatever your area is. I mean, obviously winds and brass think about their hydration a little bit more probably than string players, but everybody it's important to you
Mhm.
because you're traveling through different climates, different time zones.
Mhm.
You need to be really mentally alert. And
Mhm.
and definitely your hydration is a big part of that. Helps you also, stay healthier. So I usually if you don't know this about hydration, I'll just share this. And I've learned this from several nutritionists. Try to drink half your body weight in ounces of water every day, at least 72 hours out of your show or your performance. So 72 hours out, start keeping up with about half your body weight in ounces of water. That's not Coke, that's not tea, that's not coffee, sodas, it's just water. So, and then the other half of it, with the sleep, I didn't mention this, but the sleep, you're running off of 2 nights ago's sleep. So, whatever the day is, if your audition's on a Saturday, you're running off of Thursday night sleep. So just make sure that you're really kind of thinking about that when you're preparing. You're not trying to rush your sleep on Thursday night. Say, I'll get a good night's sleep the night before the audition. Try to build it up so you're ramping up with more nights of positive sleep. And then I think the other big thing is again that organization piece we talked about a little earlier on, just making sure you know everything. And I will say this is one thing that my father did for me when I was going through my auditions, and I really really appreciate it. And not everybody has this, but I can say that he was an athlete in college, so he kind of got this part of it. But
Mhm.
he would always go and kind of scope out where I would have to play. And
Mhm.
so, if you're lucky enough and get to travel with a parent or guardian, and they could help you with this part, like just ask them to know the map of the campus. So, or you study the map of the campus so that
Mhm.
they can go and scope out where you have to play so that you're not lost. And look, his campuses are often very confusing. So just know where that hall is or know where you have to check in so you can get there, the music building is. And I think those little things can really add up to being a lot of help. And then I also just recommend no red eyes if you're having to fly across country, because that just doesn't help the sleep cycle. And then just try to, if you can financially afford this part, I know this is a very expensive process, but I recommend trying to get there at least about the day before the audition, because sometimes the stuff will start at 9 a.m. or 8 a.m. And sorry, one more small tidbit too is that if you don't know this, some of the audition days are called simple days and some are called complex days. A simple day is where you just go in, you play your audition, and you leave. So it's just, and auditions usually run, and strings are different than winds and brass and percussion and singers, but usually the order of the audition is that you walk in, you can play a couple notes. If they don't ask you to play a couple notes, do, because you get a chance to feel the space you're in. It's really important. Then if they're going to ask you techniques such as scales or maybe arpeggios, they're going to do that right at the front usually. Then it's solos. If you have orchestral excerpts, that's usually next. Then etudes, if you have those. Some string players don't have either of those things. And then after that, usually there's a sight reading if that exists in the audition, followed by interview questions, and then your turn to ask questions. And so you want to know that order because that's important. And you always want to know, like sometimes you'll get asked, what piece should I start with? And so, have a mental game plan of like, if I get to choose my entire order for this audition, this is the order I'm going to go in. Usually they'll let you choose your first piece and then they choose everything else. But sometimes you get to choose the entire order and then sometimes you don't get to choose a thing. So just know that those are options, but always have that game plan before you walk in.
Thank you. That like all those tips definitely I think will help musicians in the future.
Yeah, they're things I wish I knew for sure.
Yeah, me too. Like I had no idea about like the hydration part and like the sleep part. It's so important because a lot of musicians don't do either. And I know wind players are really good about drinking water, but string players are not so good about drinking
and
water.
and pianists and harpists, all those that don't necessarily
Yeah.
worry so much about like what's happening in your mouth.
Mhm.
But just yeah, I would say, I mean, I'm not saying, some harpists and string players I'm sure are great at it, but just globally, everybody should be thinking about it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. So this next question is, what should high school seniors be doing right now during this audition break?
So it's a great question. So I think what I would say first and foremost is that you're kind of at the start of this whole long, like I said, marathon. So if you're feeling a little bit like, man, I just finished my exams, my finals at school, and I just got all the pre-screenings done and I got all my apps in, or maybe you have a couple little straggler things to do for certain apps, you need a break. You need to take some time for yourself. You need to have some, R&R, get just rest and relaxation.
Mhm.
Um, I would say sleep a lot. Just take 3 days and say, "You know what? I'm gonna give myself a guilt-free time away from my instrument where I do something fun, do something for myself," and pick those dates. Maybe you can take them now, maybe you can take them in a week or 2 weeks, or maybe your family's going out of town. So choose those times right now and just say, "I'm not gonna think about my instrument, and I'm not gonna feel guilty about it." I think we all feel guilty when we don't practice. I mean, usually we kinda do.
Mhm.
And so just decide what those days are and take those times and take it totally guilt free. And don't think about it. Don't worry about your instrument. That will give you a little bit of time to kind of and then ramp back up when you kind of come in, just meaning like I'm going to ease back into this process by like day 3 back. You're kind of back to your normal schedule of practice. And then you need to really look at this marathon of auditions. Once you have it all mapped out on your calendar, I think it's also important to kind of figure out like what day you might have as a light day in the week. So if you've got the amount of auditions coming up, I would really recommend that you look through that and say, okay, I've got, if you have like 2 or 3 auditions pretty close together, the day after those are done, you need to kind of put in there about 24 hours where you again give yourself a light day. Like maybe that just means 30 minutes of warming up, or maybe that means for, especially for those like, that are smaller motor muscle instruments like brass or winds, you might, or percussion even, you might need a full day off. Because if you've been playing too much, you sometimes you need that day. So you want to plan all that out in your calendar. But I think just the biggest thing right now is just giving yourself a break and then starting to get everything really organized and then just checking your practice like you asked me earlier and using some of those tips. And the organization is so key in this window.
Mhm. Yeah, definitely. It can be really stressful to think about what's coming next, but I think like the most important part is to just know that whatever happens, like happens and like everyone's gonna do their best. And I actually did another interview today with a current senior in college who told me like the best advice that he got was to just do his best and know that like everyone's time will come and like what's meant to be is meant to be, and like these college admissions people do really want you to succeed, and as long as you try your best, and that's you can't like compare yourself to others. And I think that's like the most important part is to just like relax and like
Yeah, and
gonna
have fun. I mean,
yeah.
I think the thing to know too is that the every audition's over in like 10 to 15 minutes. And if you can really go in and just give yourself the small goal of, you know what, I'm gonna go and I'm gonna have fun with this, no matter how it goes, like because I'm here to play music. Like it's supposed to be fun, you know?
Yeah.
And so, and I think if you can give yourself that goal, I'm gonna do my best and I'm just gonna go have fun with what I'm about to play. And whatever happens, happens. But I have done the best I can possibly do to get here to be in this moment.
Mhm.
And try to enjoy it because once it's over, it's almost like you start to crave the next one. And so it's like, I mean, you'll have plenty in this process, hopefully, but it's that is that. And I will say there's something that I always call when you're done with the whole thing, especially when you get to like, March,
Mhm.
I call it post obsession depression, which is like just whenever you do something big, if you feel kind of like it's over now and so much you'll learn from this process that it's amazing for yourself as a musician and your path and your career. And so, just try to enjoy it because it's a real special time because like I said, you don't always get the chance to try to peak, 12 times in a solo situation in
Mhm.
such a short window. And so try to use that to your advantage.
Yeah, and there's definitely always going to be other auditions, like
100%.
it's not the last one. So there's going to be
Definitely, yeah, definitely not.
yeah.
And I would even encourage seniors too that once this is all over, because oftentimes you've been playing the same repertoire for a while. I encourage a lot of my own private students to then plan like a recital, but pick stuff that you maybe are not, definitely are not doing right now, but things you play. It could be, anything and any form of the repertoire and
Mhm.
just so you can do it and have fun and invite your family and your friends and just kind of enjoy the process after it's all over. And usually we don't do that till like May or June when closer to like graduation, it's like a graduation piece. But I think it's important to think about after all this is over because sometimes it does feel like wow, that's done. And but I think giving yourself even a fun goal to think about when it's all over could be another fun piece of it.
Yeah, definitely. I also think like starting new rep after you've been working on something for so long is also really refreshing too. Um, and yeah, it can be something to look forward to, definitely. My
Yeah,
last
definitely.
Yeah, my last question for you is what advice would you give to someone who didn't get accepted into their top school or might be like upset with their audition results but want to continue within the music field? Like if they have if they don't necessarily have a top backup school or a school that they really want to go to, but they still want to pursue music, like what would
So I think the first thing I would say is that it's like what you were saying the student said to you earlier today, that doing your best is, is what we can do. And sometimes it just becomes, um where you got into is kind of where you're supposed to be, or what the path you're currently on is where what's supposed to happen. And it's really hard sometimes to see that when you're in the moment of it. I always think about some things that happened in my life, and I'm always like, oh, that was a bummer that that didn't happen. But then you're like, well, oh, this happened, or I got to meet this person, or I got to do this thing, and those would not have happened if the other thing had happened. So the point um is that it while it's hard to see that in the moment, it's part of the ride, it's part of the journey. And I think if you can kind of treat it like, my journey will unfold in front of me, I think that that's a really important piece of it. Um, it's always easier said than done, I know. But I would say this too for anybody that's going into any area of music, and it doesn't necessarily have to be performance, but I would like to share that part of this process of the college prep for musicians is that I spent a lot of time looking at all the different career options in music, and I've actually come up with 169 different career options within music. And you can take the word music and make it an adjective and put it in front of so many different careers: music industry, music production, music history, music. So there's music law, music business, music performance, which we all know, music education, which we usually all know, music therapy. So you can add that adjective music in front of so many different career paths. And so I think that is important to think about, because just knowing your instrument is a gateway to any of those career paths, because you have the skills to talk the talk and walk the walk. And so don't be concerned that if you don't have those other things, that it might lead that this might lead to something else, for you too. But I would just say that just know that those are options. And so the second thing I would mention is that if for some reason you're wanting to go into performance and you don't get that pathway, right out the gate, or maybe it's not the top school you want to go to, an option is always a gap year. So in a gap year, what you would usually do is you would, maybe take more lessons. You would find, make sure that you're with a teacher that is helping you fix things that you might not have fixed for the current year of auditions. And that you'd probably get like a part-time job. And then you would really focus on your practice with no academic work, no school work for the next year. And then you'd go through the process again. And I've led some students through some fantastic gap years where they've gotten huge scholarships into schools they would have never dreamed of the first time, and that has been something that's been a positive experience for them. So it's you have to take a step back and kind of say, okay, what do I want to do now with this? If it's not your top choice, but maybe it's another school, is the school going to serve you well? And then if not, you do have other options. So don't feel like you're stuck with this, direction. And obviously there's great junior colleges, there's great 4-year universities out there, but just know there are a lot of options, and they don't just have to be the ones that you applied to right now.
Yeah, definitely. And I know there's probably, since it wasn't someone's top choice, would you have any advice on like how to handle that mentally if like
Yeah, I mean, I think resilience is something that's really important in our field and our career. And so resilience is, picking yourself back up and be like, all right, put me back in, I'm ready to go. And so I keep a stack of rejection letters in my file cabinet, literally. And it's this, I'm not joking, it's this thick. It's from summer festivals, from schools, from auditions I've taken. Sometimes I literally go pull it out and I'm kind of like, I'm pretty happy with my career right now. So part of me wants to go like, meh, to all those places that I got
Yeah.
these rejections from. But
Mhm.
the resilience is big in our industry because it's a subjective field. It's not like you can go, hear the numbers and here's exactly where you are. It's somebody's opinion of you and how you play. And so, and your potential and all these things. And so you just have to know that, that part of this process, and we've all been torn down. I think nobody survives in this industry if they can't pick themselves back up,
Yeah.
and so I think you just have to say, you know what, I'm ready for this, and keep your head up high and just say, all right, put me back in. And as much as that stunk or sucked or whatever you want to say, but you just have to be prepared for it, knowing that going into it, because if it doesn't happen now, for some reason, it will happen in the future. I hate to say that, but but at that point, you just have to be ready for it and say, let's do it again.
Yeah, and I think it's also like all about like adjusting to, that sense of rejection. And everyone in the music industry is going to experience it one day or the other. And I think it's just like about looking forward and looking at the positive side and knowing that you're going to fail. Um, I think it's just really important. And like we've all had like a bunch of rejection, but at the same time, that's helped shape who we are today as musicians. And it's definitely going to help us in the future because, like you said, it does show resilience. Um, but thank you so much for joining us for this interview. If you want to learn more about Classically Imperfect, make sure to click the link in our bio. Bye.